Okay, so let's do some cloth. We've done a lot of stuff on the body. I think we've really kind of gotten the idea of how this all works. So in this chapter we're going to do a lot of the same things, but some of the ideas are a little bit different. Some of the material creation is a little bit different, since we've really been only working with the skin material so far. But the base ideas are all the same, where we're going to take clothing, we're going to take a mesh, and we're going to save out the text border. We're going to do quick dirt. We're going to bring it back into Photoshop. We're going to use some textures. We're going to do some just painting, using some filters, everything, just to kind of get just the effect that we want. So in these kind of objects, you can see the quick dirt really works pretty well. Let's bring that up a little bit. Now in cloth, what's a great way to do it is to save, with quick dirt, is to do two different passes. One is going to be a very precise pass. One is going to be very tight and really nice for getting those bumps. The other one is going to be more of a soft light pass. So we want it to be a little bit blurrier and have a bit of a bit more bright. So we're going to save that one out as our soft light pass. Come back up here, return to bumps, and turn off that. And then it's a good starting point, but I think it needs to be a little sharper. We're going to dial those around a little bit. We just want to really get the crevices the most. That's good enough, so we can always do some adjustments in Photoshop. So we save that out, both of them, and into Photoshop we go. Now one of the files I opened there was a cloth file that I've made, and I'll give that away as well. It's got tileable texture, may even have a few seams in it to be honest, but usually we use it so soft and so light that you'll never notice it. But it does add a little bit of texture to the object. You gotta be careful you don't make it too big or you get a really burlap sack type look. So, which can come in handy when you're making burlap sacks. Alright, so I know what color I want to make this. Is kind of a light, kind of brownish, yellowy color. He's been wearing this shirt for a long, long time. Alright, so we zoom in. Let's get started on this. Let's find the color we like on this quick dirt. And then I'm going to adjust the lightness a little bit. Just keeping an eye on what it's doing. You can see I took the multiply with the tighter one. And then we're using a soft light at like 30%, maybe even 20% when we're all done. And the two of them, keeping the multiply on top, it kind of gives a nice bulged kind of feel to all of these wrinkles. So it should enhance the actual modeling detail that's in there. Now if we were doing something like with cloth sim, which I mentioned in the modeling DVD, we wouldn't model all these wrinkles in because it would really be a nightmare for the simmers to deal with. But since we're just doing this for a model, and for a lot of our cinematic characters, we'll just model this stuff in because it doesn't matter too much. It's usually fairly low res renders, so we don't have to really worry about seeing all these little wrinkles happening. So use a stroke on this. Thinking it might give a nice effect of a kind of ribbed collar. I might try it again. Yeah. So if we go in here, I'm going to turn on the texture tool and just use this kind of split little diagonal line I have and just turn the scale way down. One thing we're lucky on this kind of character is that all of this ribbing is going to be kind of hidden by the jacket except for the front. Because as we zoom out, you'll actually notice that it kind of stretches weird when it gets further back. I just turn the opacity down. There you go. You can kind of see that it doesn't follow the ribbing. But this is going to be just fine for what we want. Maybe turn the color a little bit different too. We're going to add some sweat stains later on, so it'll make a little bit more sense. Then we're going to change this color a little. Want it to be different, but not too different. So here's that texture I made. We're going to grab that. It's actually a variation of when we use it blur quite a bit. I'm putting that on a soft light. As you can see at this point, it's a little bit thick. But I turn it down to about 20%. You can just barely see it. If anything, you should only see it when it gets to the close-ups. But as it's on a separate layer, we can actually make a bump pass of just that. Different colors. Now, something I'll do here sometimes is I'll actually, I made a new layer here, filled it with white, even though it's the exact same selection we had before. And then I put it on multiply. What that does is all of these filters that we're adding are going to show up as whatever their blending options are, but that layer itself doesn't do anything. And we're just kind of using a cloud texture to break this up a little bit. And then put it on darken. So fade it back a little bit and gives a nice kind of effect there. The Brazil Advance just to see what it looks like. Nice and plastic. So obviously we don't want that. I'm going to throw this on the diffusion. Keep it pretty low. And when we add this to the velvet, we're actually going to have to dial that quite a bit down. Otherwise the velvet effect itself won't show up. The fall off of color there just really will affect the subsurface scattering, and it'll also really affect the sheen effect that the velvet gives. We're going to turn that off. We don't. If I wanted to make this wet, we have all these different options. We can even use that as a sheen effect on the velvet, which will just kind of double it up. But what's nice is you can kind of dial it down too. So let's see. It already looks a little bit more cloth-like. I don't want to spend too much time on this material because I will be putting so much stuff over it. As you can see, just a little bit of it shown. Let's grab the parts that we've actually worked on now and see how it looks. Now, with this step, we haven't done some of the things we did in the last chapter. This is I grouped all the main cloth stuff together here, so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So the face and whatnot might look a little old. I think we're gonna do mostly far away renders. Just drag that off screen. Alright, well, I think that's going to be good enough for the undershirt because we're not doing very much with it. It's going to be pretty much hidden. It's just a t-shirt, and I don't think we're doing too many crazy close-ups. Now, at this point on the jacket, I'm thinking about maybe keeping the collar and the jacket as one object, but just the way the two shapes are, I don't think it'll work too well, and they're also pretty big each. So I figure I'm going to break them both up into their own materials. So here we go. And a multi-sub object will do the trick. And we might as well add the shirt in there too. It's a good idea to keep your skin onto one, and it's also nice to keep all your cloth onto one. This multi-sub object, it's a good way to organize it so you don't have a million different shaders in each. But it's also just kind of good for the Max itself because it won't crash so much. You won't have so many different textures being loaded every time you look at one of those shader balls. And that's always good. The less crashing, the better. So we're going to do the quick dirt again. And I want to rename it. Now the reason I'm doing this is I'm breaking apart the collar and the jacket because go to Photoshop. Start by loading these two together. Then we delete the ones we don't need and make sure we get rid of that black outline because you'll start to get kind of a cartoon effect where that just tiny bit of black kind of gets stretched up onto the actual textures, and you get this black outline on a lot of areas that doesn't look very nice. So we've gotten rid of that. I'm loading up Hong's design because I want to grab the colors off of it. There we go. Just like we did last time, I put a soft light on there at about 20%, and then I put a multiply above that at about probably 30%. And then I'm going to adjust these levels on those two things. These colors don't come off too well from the compression, so check out the supplementals on this, and I'll have all the main texture files saved for you to look at. Alright, we're going to load in some files now. Now with leather, there's a couple of different ways we could do this, and I'm just going to go for the simplest way. But the skin shader can even be used to make a nice leather if you turn off the subsurface scattering. We've got some pretty good results that way, but it is a bit of a slow shader too. So these are some maps that we've had at Blur for a while, so I hope no one minds me using them, but they're just a good texture for what I wanted to use here. And the color was a little bit off, so I'm just putting a layer above it and just adjusting it right there. I'm going to collapse two, and I have the selection already set, so I can just invert and delete the stuff around it. So there's our first part of our jacket right there. Just going to scale it in. The size of the bump on the leather is going to be a bit much there. We're also going to add a bit of a fractal kind of noise that'll kind of simulate some of that bump as well. Leather has kind of this... it's got this kind of crazy pattern to it where the skin and pores and wrinkles and everything kind of have happened, so it's kind of hard to just do that just through texture or just through a fractal kind of pattern. So by combining the two you can get a pretty decent result. Some of this is getting a little bit tiled, I know, but we're going to fix that with the cloning tool and with the healing brush. And a heck of a lot more texturing to come. I've got dual monitors at work, so I like to drag the textures back and forth between the two monitors and see how they look on two different monitors. It's amazing the difference that just some calibration can make. So, if you have the option, it's nice. This comes out pretty dark here, but with the lighting and when we add the rest of the shader stuff to it, we want this to be pretty dark. In fact, I was almost thinking of making it just a black material. So here's that top kind of shoulder piece part. We make it a little darker, a little less saturated, and then we blur the mask. You might notice I use a lot of the layer effect type stuff, like levels, hue, saturation, all of that as separate layers, because you could do it just on the base layers themselves and collapse stuff, but it's nice to be able to control that later on. So I try to keep that separate as much as possible, just based on selections, and whatever your selection is when you make it, it's going to mask it off that way, so it's kind of nice. Alright, so the leather should have a bit of a shininess to it. And the velvet, it should also have a bit of a sheen too, so the velvet might not be a bad shader to start with. We may even end up keeping it this way. When it comes to this kind of stuff, I like to play a little bit and see how different shaders are going to react. We also have a nice library at work that we can use, but if I'm making it from scratch, I'll definitely do this. I'll play around and try to find the ones that work the best. You can see that it has a bit of a leather look to it. The sheen's a bit much right now. Okay, we added a little bit of a bump to it. And as you can see, as soon as we put that diffusion in there, it just killed the velvet effect. But having a little bit is nice, so we'll tone that down in a minute. I want a little bit of a reflection too, so just a bit. Probably put a map in there to make sure it doesn't take forever to render. So that should help things. Speed-wise, it should go a little quicker. Well, let's see how this looks. Pretty generic right now. You can see why this bump is quite large. It's not following the pattern at all. We just kind of threw some stuff on there. Because what I want here is to have a little change to the edge of this thing. As you'll see in a moment. So I'm thinking about maybe doing the stitching like this, but I don't know, it looks a little ropey. I don't think it's going to quite work the way I want it to. But if I fade it back a little bit, maybe it'll add a little texture to it. So instead of that, I think I'm just going to make a brush really quick and actually draw the stitching in myself. You can see I'm just adjusting the spacing, but I don't want it to go wild, so I just want to keep the spacing so it's pretty even. And then I want this thing to be pretty sleek. Crank the spacing up pretty much to the max. See what that brush did. Okay. Scale it down a bit. Alright, it's looking pretty good. Because I think some stitching on this jacket would help a lot. It's not quite even though. Got to adjust a few more things here. There we go. Not quite there yet. There we go. Then we go up that way, so we want to adjust that a little bit more. And you can just keep rotating these things. Doesn't have to be perfect. Once again, we're not going to be doing a super close-up on this guy, so I don't need to kill myself making sure the stitching's right, but if the idea of stitching is there, it'll help a lot. And my laziness prevails. I don't want to do it all the way across, so the warp tool comes in really handy at this point. We'll just erase the parts that overlap. Whoever invented the warp tool is a very good person. Okay, so we got some stitching going on the jacket, and just title that layer. It's a good idea to try and keep your Photoshop files as organized as you can. I need to practice what I preach a bit more, but so here. And all this is just, I'm playing with a bunch of different settings to try and see if I can get the look I want without having to spend a lot of time painting it. Some of it's just kind of a waste of time. So, it comes to a point where you just start finding the ones that work and you keep it like that. Which is right here. Pretty much just keeping the spread, the size, about where we need it. I can see it's looking about how I like it. We've pretty much gone back to how we had it. I want to go back to a simpler brush. But first I want to save this brush because I might want to do more stitching later on, and it makes sense to keep this brush that worked pretty well. Whenever you make a brush that you're pretty happy with, you should keep it. Now, this piece here, it looks a little too textured, so I thought maybe I could fix that up by adding a little bit of wrinkles in the texture here. Gotta get the brush working just right. Once again, using that outer glow with a bit of a dark color and multiply. You can just barely see him doing little tweaks here and there. I want to pull that up a little bit more too. You can see I'm starting to get kind of a crevice effect though. There you go. It's subtle, but it starts to show up. This is nice for making kind of a rim around objects or creating little wrinkles. If you're painting this in black and white, it's a great way to make a bump map because it keeps everything soft and organic. And here I'm just holding shift and clicking along the pattern, or the top part here. Could probably bring a little bit more brightness out on the centerpiece, but so we go along here. There's another chapter on this I'll be doing, but I'm just going to put it in the supplementals. I'm not going to speak over it. It's something you can watch in case you're interested. But the techniques are about the same. And this is really a starting point. Once you've done this, you can just keep refining stuff and using textures and using photo reference and painting your own stuff a little bit. So we're going to save this and take a look, see if it worked. And keep the darkness down too. We got a pretty dark jacket going here. We don't want anything to pop out too much. This is just kind of going to go right along the edge of his sleeves where it's been rolled up a bit. Just going to duplicate that. And using the good old warp tool, just get this thing back into place and keep it all pretty seamless too. And then erase the areas that overlap and look a little strange. But this jacket is so bunched up and crazy that I think just having some texture there is going to be a big help. We'll duplicate to the other side and just using the shear kind of get it into place. And then warp it a little bit more. Collapse those two layers. Then I kind of want to just paint in a little bit of shading on this thing. Not overly do it, but just a little bit. He's got that belt on, so... And here I'm just gonna want to add some more kind of frayed edges and stuff. Just using that quick turn, I'm kind of following along where right where the edges and the seams kind of happen. Want to keep that going. Alright, and then we're going to add some dirt too. During the last chapter, we're going to do a lot of stuff with dirt. Actually, not the last chapter. Close to the last chapter. We're going to dirty up all the clothes, mud on the pants and boots. But this kind of breaks up the texture a lot more too. And once again, this is just using some texture from walls or concrete, or you can really use anything at this point. There's all these different blending modes, and then you're painting stuff too. Now, I thought it'd be cool if he had a little icon on his jacket, and I don't know why, but dice popped in my head, so I drew some dice. My amazing cube drawing abilities, I know, they're staggering. And just erasing those edges that got a little soft and whatnot. What we'll do here is we'll also use this as a normal map and kind of pop them out a little bit. I obviously had no real dice in front of me when I was making this, so I'm just making it up. But we don't have any mix on right now, so it's not really going to do too much. So, if anything at all. There we go. And we've assigned it. And we're going to change the highlight to be a blend. Let's get those lights out here. I want to see what my lights are doing right now. Don't think they're really being too complimentary on my textures, so I want to just add a little bit more. Now at this point I'm kind of thinking maybe I want to add a specular light only, that only really casts specular highlights, but I'm going to end up deleting it. It's a little bit of a cheat, so it's not really a great idea to use anyway. I'm going to use that align tool to snap it right into place, because really I just wanted to kind of bring out the specular on just that one light a little bit more. The Brazil lights have the option to actually turn that up per setting, but this is kind of a simple enough cheat to see what it'll do. Okay, well, not sure if I really liked what it did anyway, so we'll end up deleting that a little bit. But it's also a good way to test to see what your maps are really doing. All right. So now what I'm going to do is just like we've done before with the normal map. Interesting shading network going on here. We're making the bump map is quite complex on this right now. Well, not really complex, but it's more complex than usual. And because I like that cellular pattern, I'm going to mimic it on the gloss as well. But I don't know if it really helps, so let's turn it back off. See, we still have a lot of details to add. So I'll speed things up a little bit here. Just adjusting a lot of stuff here. High color, we're just changing a lot of things. Instead of, yeah, I decided to go for a noise instead of the cellular. I think it ended up working a little bit better. We're going to take a look at the concept art again. I think we're kind of getting there. I think we need to enhance some more stuff on it, definitely. But that'll come up, so. Gotta let the computer boot up, there we go. We loaded in a piece of the actual, to get the color a little bit nicer, a piece of the actual concept art. Obviously, it's not what we wanted, I just want to grab the color itself. We're going to fade it back a little bit too because it's a little bit bright. And then erase on some areas because we want to break up the color too. A lot of the wrinkle areas should be a little bit more desaturated. That top piece probably a little bit more desaturated. Got some weird stuff going on with the wet edges and whatnot, so. And I'll have all these high-res textures for you to look at on the disc, as well as a lot of the pieces I used to make them. I'm going to resize because this is such a big part of his costume that I think it needs to have a little bit more texture space. And my UVs, though clean, I could have done a lot better job on the two pieces of the front, dragging them out a little bit more. But I didn't, so that's okay. And then for this color that I added, I also grabbed the I turned the dirt on just by itself, and then you grabbed its blue channel information. It would have been fine to use any of the other channel information as well, and then use that as a mask for that. This is just some a little bit more texture to add to this right now. You can see it right there. A little hard to see on the screen, but when it renders out, it's noticeable. Don't know why I have the text stuff open, so we'll close that. I'm just duplicating some of these little spot patterns. I'm gonna open another file now. Just one sec. Okay. So let's grab this. I want to take a look at my my actual texture map. It'll help me when I'm painting. The quick dirt's really helpful too, but sometimes it's nice to really see those lines and know where everything is. There we go. Gonna plop this on top. Now I want to fray these edges. They're a little, everything's getting a little dark, so now that we've gotten this kind of dark base coat going on, it's time to bring out some of these edges a little bit. Once again, using that technique of having the little drop shadow type thing. Excuse me, the outer glow that's actually not a glow. We're just following along on the texture map, making sure that we're going along where the seams would go on the jacket. It's going pretty well. Now you can copy and paste layer styles too, so if you get one that you like, you never really have to try and recreate it. You can just copy it by right-clicking on the layer under the F, and paste it on the next layer. It will change your blending too, so you can see we're getting that nice frayed edges kind of going on. Darkened up some of these seams that are going on, and I also want to, on the pocket, bring out that a little bit. Maybe add a little bit of pattern on here. There you go. Now for the stitching, we really could have just done something like this, just as easy as everything else we did. And for something more realistic, you could start with a lot of this stuff, but just you would keep refining it, or you would just simply do as we did before, where we grab the texture maps, and using the warp tool and erasing the areas that we don't want, you could get photorealistic stuff as well. And then that really depends on your materials the most, and your lighting, to get that look. Just the Alright. So some of those I'm jumping back to max and doing a quick render, and then jumping back over here to fix things, because I cropped that for time. Only showing stuff when we do a lot of changes. So just painting along these seams, keeping it dark in the middle and kind of light along the edges. Kind of a fake 3D effect right there. And when we generate the normal maps again, it'll bring that out a little bit more too. And we can do these on a separate layer as well, and really and layer up the normal map too. We can do so many things. So we'll just fix that. Then we're breaking it up a little bit. Adding some scratches and just really kind of fraying any edges that should be frayed. Stuff helps to sell it. And then these big wrinkles that kind of came down, they'd be rubbed up a little bit. The seam from where the sleeve comes in. Let's speed it up a little bit here. Then Nothing along there. Most of this stuff is kind of hidden up by other things too, so don't need to spend too much time on it right now. Overall, pretty happy with how it's looking. Where we really pull out a lot of the edges on a jacket and just to keep everything sharp. A jacket like this should have some sharp edges where it got bunched up on the sleeves. So you can see there, I just kind of brought out the, I was trying to bring out the dice, but I accidentally had the RGB color on, so I painted white over them. So I just reloaded the texture. And even though it's a little, now here we go, we're using that inflate and smooth again, just like we did before. And it's a fairly dark color, so it didn't do too much craziness with our, I had layer on, so let's just go. I think at this point we could probably just get away with using projection master for a lot of these wrinkles on the clothes. So these shoulder areas would be nice to get some better wrinklage going on as soon as it wakes up. Alright, and then we're just going to enhance most of a lot of the wrinkles that we've already actually modeled into the jacket. And add little ones around it too. These aren't the most realistic wrinkles in the world, but I think as a normal map they should kind of help bring the point across. And we'll pick it up. I don't have normalized on because when we generate these maps we don't want to go in 3 directions basically. Which seems to do that, so. Same reason we usually just use the standard brush when we're painting. And that's where the jacket kind of gets pulled by that belt, so here's a good place to add a little bit of that tension. And we also have that collar that's going to take up a lot of real estate as well. The textures are pretty dark, so it's a little hard to see at this point, but just kind of going over where the texture map has some detail. A lot of those little spots that we added earlier, I'm just kind of going over and making them kind of punched in a little bit. Because when we did the texture map, it actually kind of enhanced them. It brought them out, which is not the look I wanted. I wanted to go inward. Probably not the most noticeable thing. We're not going to get that close to it, but while we're here. And this would be a great place for the Z-App link as well. We could just, if we had great reference photos, we could just take it from different angles and plop it on. Okay, so now we can kind of get an idea of what's going on with this. It's getting pretty close to being done on this part. This is basically how we do all the clothing, so if you watch the other piece you'll be able to see the pants and the boots and everything being made, but because it's a little bit repetitive I'm not going to cover it. I think by going over the body and now the jacket and the t-shirt we've pretty much covered all the difficult parts of map creation. We still have hair and some rigging and stuff to do. So we're making the normal map now. And it generates. I've got it cranked up a little bit on the samples, which will take a little bit more time, but the result should be a little bit better. And it'll automatically flip, which is nice for now. Now, with this piece of the collar, we don't have to really recreate a lot of stuff. We just want to make the dirt past this, because what we can do is actually just grab that collapsed jacket without the dirt on it, and we'll pretty much have a nice starting point for this, and then we can, probably desaturate parts and maybe brighten it up a little bit so it kind of pops a little bit better than the rest of the jacket. But here we go. So there's that piece. Copy, paste, copy. Into place real quick. Gonna speed things up a little bit. We're just grabbing all the main stuff that actually made that jacket texture look like it does. We're getting pretty close to being done too. But we still have to bring out a few details. We want to paint the edges just like we did before. So I copied the layer style and brought it over here. Now I'm just there we go. Take a look at this real quick. And we're just pasting in these things. Where the jacket used to be, now it's jacket collar. So there we go, those are the two together. Still a little bit more tweaking to do before we're quite done. As you can see, I don't have two-sided on there. Any material like this that has any kind of ability to be seen through should always be two-sided. And there's some overrides you could do, but it should just be in the material just in case they don't turn that on, or in case there's a reason not to turn it on. But yeah, I can see it's getting a little bit better. And we'll save this out. And we're going to do the normal map filter again, which we've gone over a few times. I'm just duplicating it with soft light on and then collapsing it. Now you can start to see it a little bit better. And jacket call N. N is for normal. And a few tweaks. Make sure everything's reloaded correctly. Bring some of this out. Doing the same thing we did before where we have that fall off with one that's a little bit more saturated and interesting. We're going to do it on both the jacket and the jacket collar. I think shadow and light would probably work for this. The way leather kind of works. So we're going to take a look and see how it looks once we render it. And yep, pretty much exactly how I want it to look. It's got a nice style to it. It's not overly developed, but pretty much ready to go at this point. So moving on to the next chapter now.